Hello, everyone, and welcome to another horrific chat. Tonight, I'm joined by author Si Todd as we talk about his inspirations, current projects, and journey into horror. Welcome, Si, and thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much. Can't wait for this. This is going to be great fun.
Okay, well, I don't know if I can get over my crippling shyness and ask questions. I think we'll be all right. No, so last time we were together, we were actually playing a game, and you were running it, and had a lot of fun over in Infinite Monkey Tales, which is their fourth anniversary today. So happy birthday to those folks.
Oh, happy birthday.
They have been
Absolutely.
playing games all weekend, and I'm like, sorry, I'm busy with this, busy with that. I'll get on, honest, I promise. For the weekend's out, I'll jump on and do something.
Well, I've been writing all weekend so far. I've been writing stories to do with the game I've been doing because it's called The End of Kings, and it's set in the 17th century. It's about the idea, very, very basically, if you took all the supernatural phobias, paranoias, witches, demons, all that sort of stuff, and pretended they were actually real. That's what you've got with the game. 17th century, 1600 to 1700. You've got English Civil War. You've got plagues every other year. You've got the Great Fire of London. You've got the king being beheaded. It's an absolute era of chaos, and it's perfect for a role-playing game.
Yep. Forgive me, I only got GCSE history. But I remember we were playing the game and you're dropping hints, and I'm just going, oh, I remember that. I don't remember enough. Oh God, I'm gonna have to start reading again.
Well, I'm hoping this is going to be for an international market. And I think the important thing while I was writing it is, although I did all the research and I keep doing more research, in fact, I found more stuff out today that I'm shoehorning into the game. I didn't want it to be intimidating for people that don't know history. It's basically a big sandbox. It's a role-playing game where you play a character. The environment is not looking at the big history. It's not looking at the Roundheads versus the Cavaliers. It's not looking at that. That's there, but it's all in the background unless you choose to involve.
Oh yeah, but that's what I found fascinating. Just like I said, I remember a lot from school, and I have a general interest, and I was just like, oh God, I remember. I was just bringing it all flooding back, and I loved it. I'm not saying I was intimidated. I loved it. It just made me wish I'd read a bit more.
Oh well,
But that's not a bad rabbit hole to go down.
Hopefully, I mean, I wherever I've mentioned something historically, I have done the research as to when it happened. But having said that, towards the end of the book, by the way, excuse me,
plug.
Hold on, let's go. There it is.
Yep. Hold up a few table legs up. So that is no small feat. I suppose first thing is, what on earth made you decide, oh, this is a good idea to spend a few years of my life getting put together?
I didn't know it would be that big when I started. I seriously didn't. Okay, it's a number of things. It starts off when I first discovered Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It was 1979, and I was on holiday with my mum and dad in America, and there was a choice of boxes in a post office, Tunnels or Trolls, or Dungeons and Dragons, and I asked the lady, and she said something like, I think it's Arthurian has come from England. So she hadn't a clue. So I chose Dungeons and Dragons at random, and as I suppose the rest is history, after we played through the B1 dungeon, I started writing on my own. And I continue to do that until the present day. I've continued to, and most of the time, I haven't been so much writing my own, but winging it. So I have spent 20, 30 years of my life just making up stories as I went along, and big complex ones as well. And then about 2000, just before we moved up from Rutland, I met my old English teacher. This all feeds in. And she said, and she was coming for a vice principal post at a sixth form college where I was teaching. And she looked at me and said, why aren't you writing novels? And I said, well, I'm an artist. I made great big sculptures at the time. And she said, I always thought you'd be a novelist. And I said, well, I almost failed my A-level English. And she said, that's irrelevant because you do know grades don't mean anything, don't you? And that was her saying that. and I went home, and it was like I needed that nudge. Suddenly I started getting on the computer and writing short stories. and I wrote 4 or 5 of them in the state of about 6 months. And then it was about 10 years ago that I did a trip to GaryCon in America. For the first year, I was just playing there, and I realized that I could create dungeons far better than the ones I was actually in. That the things I was winging at home were superior to the ones I was experiencing at the convention. And it was pretty much the first convention of any type that I'd been to. So I got home and I started writing role-playing game adventures specifically to be played at conventions. And as I was doing that, I suddenly realized that I could take all the best, or for me, the most sensible rule systems, mash them together and create something that I would play. And so I sort of like mashed up bits of Dungeons and Dragons, bits of Call of Cthulhu, like the percentage skill system. And I sort of like bundled them together. And then I thought, one more ingredient. I wanted to figure out real world, best place, best time in history, where superstition and science were sort of knocking heads together. And it ended up being the 17th century. Looked at it, you had the Great Fire of London, a load of plagues, as I've said, civil war. There's
still a rumor whether that was an accidental fire.
I've just literally...
post-bubonic plague, I was like, and a fire happened. Convenient.
I have just literally, earlier on today, because I've got a timeline in the book, I've actually got an alternative timeline based on the idea that magic is real. So most of the genuine historical events, like the battles during the Civil War, they're in place as they should be. But I put in 1666, Great Fire of London, started at Pudding Lane by a baker. Okay. And then I've put, after that, the next sentence, the baker was also an amateur warlock. So
it's almost, especially when it's playing, I'm almost getting like a Discworld vibe about it, and a Harry Turtledove, a bit of a mixture between Harry Turtledove and Terry Pratchett,
Yeah. There is a lot of comedy in it, but it's also, this is horror. The whole thing, I started off, I spent about 10 years of my life in a little village called Liddington in Rutland. And one of the things that stays with me is that when it got dark, you could go out into the street, and apart from the street lights, you looked around you and the valley was in pitch black. There was no other village in the area. So the whole place was in pitch black. And it got to thinking, you go back 150 years, you get to the darkness, and all you've got beyond the lights coming from the village crofts is utter darkness. And the horror of that, the fear that came, the sounds that came out of that, I suddenly realized that's where the fear was. It's all about the fear of the unknown. And that's one of the things that I want to feature in The End of Kings, that sense that settlements are islands of safety in a world of fear. And that's hopefully what it's about, really.
Sounds like there's a PC game I played a while ago that in the channel called Darkwood. It's actually a police game, and that's pretty much the same. You got the house of light, and you have to be in by dark, because if you don't have light, everything comes for you.
Oh God,
if you venture too far, that's it, you're toast.
Exactly. Well, for real. Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Bit of an interesting choice you made, because one thing I've noticed about the horror genre, it's become very sanitized, very corporate. And people are actually shying away from the horror elements, the unknown, the uncomfortable feeling. But we're having a chat offline before we went on. But it's more about, it's almost like action movies now, as opposed to proper unsettling behavior. And you even see it in writing. You see it everywhere.
Yeah.
To be honest, to be palpable for the masses, really, there should be like high adventure, almost like D&D, plus or something.
Yeah.
What made you decide, no, I'm not going that way. I'm going to lean into the actual horrific elements. Actually, that's where I'm going.
Because deep down under it, it wasn't... I didn't think, how can I make this a horror game? What I thought was, what makes this a game of threat? What makes this? I mean, because ultimately any role-playing game, if there's no threat in it, then it may as well be a Candy Crush game. It doesn't have anything going on. There's got to be a sense of threat. But for me, the ultimate sense of threat here was that the real fear of the time. You had James I. He'd been James VI of Scotland, and he'd been James VI of Scotland from the age of about 9 months. His mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, had been beheaded. He became king as a baby, effectively.
That's the background of the Isle of Skye song, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And
see, so I know I have got a tiny brain in here, but sometimes it does work.
And apparently he went off to visit his betrothed, and I might be wrong here. I think it was Princess Anne of Denmark. I think, might be wrong. And one of the ships that he was going in, one of the convoy got capsized due to a storm. He got there, and the storm persisted, and the local university professors, who were also priests, said to him, "You've got a bad case of witches." Because at the time, there'd been almost 100 years of witch trials in Europe, which had so far evaded Great Britain. And he basically went there and spent a couple of months. He regarded himself to be an intellectual. He listened to these guys. He wrote the book, first king to do so. He wrote a book called Demonology. This is the king. And the book is specifically about the best way to hunt down witches. He went back, eventually got back to Scotland, and immediately started the witch trials. And then when he became King of England in 1603, he brought it all down with him. And so straight away, you've got a whole nation of paranoia and fear. Now, if you add to that the fact that witches are real, spellcasting is real, the access to demonic worship is real, in my game, then he is quite justified in that. And
you've actually made it a literal battle.
Yes. So there is an invisible war going on all the time, which means that most of the crowned heads of Europe, plus most of the major nobility, have got their own protective unit of spellcasters and priests to defend them against the invading magical forces. And I call it the invisible war in the game. There's a constant invisible war going on. It's quite a mess, to be honest, but that's what makes it exciting. But I want the game to be from the perspective of the everyday adventurer. I call them adventurists. They're called, if they are attached to an army, they're called a skirmishing unit, because they're a mix of, like in any other game system, you've got soldiers, you've got the cunning folk or warlocks that are spellcasters, you've got priests, you've got what are called woodcairn, that are the equivalent of rangers in other games. You've also got outlaws, which are thieves and rogues, that sort of stuff. So it's the usual mix that you find in most of the games. But this is a skirmishing unit that could be hired by a local battalion or hired by a local member of the nobility to try and quietly get out of the way some form of evil. The witch hunters in the game, I mix them between the charlatan witch hunters, like the historical Matthew Hopkins, who was a charlatan. He basically went around torturing women for money. And then you've got the real witch hunters. The real witch hunters, you're looking at Solomon Kane sort of characters. And those ones are literally going around the country seeking out evil and quashing it before it gets out of hand. So it's a constant threat from the invisible, what I call the veil, beyond the veil. So that's the premise behind the whole thing.
That is steeped in folklore.
Oh yeah,
the whole idea of the veil, and even All Hallows Eve sound. The veil becomes thinner at certain times of the year, and it fits some of the equinox, and it's this sort of hibernation pattern of the mammal anyway. And it all, it's funny how we get here, and a lot of people today have just completely forgotten that. I think it's such a shame.
Do you know why I think that it's not a problem? It's natural. I think post-war there was a move away from our culture being Anglo, and it became international. The American culture started coming in. We started getting ideas from abroad. We started UFOs started coming into existence. We lost the intimacy of our personal culture. And I'm not being a patriotist or anything like that.
No,
It's a
that's the
natural
thing. And it's part of the problem with this modern conversation where everything's binary. And that's another stupid thing come over from America.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's completely caused chaos over here.
Mm.
You can be proud of your own culture and your own heritage. That doesn't mean you denigrate anybody else's.
Dead right.
And I'm
Dead
sick of that conversation. It annoys me.
The greatest achievement of our country is the fact that it's made out of all the other countries. Mm-hmm. I love it. I love being in this place. I mean, I as a teacher, I was talking to two girls who are in my class in year 7 at school from Ghana, for goodness sake. And it's just wonderful to sort of like ask them about, you know, I mean, have you only just arrived? What was Ghana like? How do you compare it with? And just constantly a feed of international feelings and ideas and cultures coming into the country. But one of the things that going all the way back to me being a sculptor, which mm-hmm. I was a practicing sculptor, huge wood carvings all over the country and that sort of thing. And my main theme was the Green Man. I wanted to find out the roots of our own folklore. Where is our cultures coming from? Where does it start? The fact that I found out it was coming from all over the world, even back then, because you had this constant invasion from the Vikings and the Saxons mm-hmm. and the Normans and all this stuff, didn't matter. But I wanted to find out where it came from. And so when I started writing End of Kings, even down to the orc, I haven't got the orc in the game. I know William Blake wrote about orcs, but goblins, they're very interesting. The kobold, which is in Dungeons & Dragons, that little dog rat-like thing, I don't know. In reality, they're closer to Pinocchio. Kobolds have been created. They're the spirit of a tree that has been summoned into one of the branches, chopped off the tree so that the tree can be chopped down, and then that piece of wood is turned into a little mannequin called a kobold, and it's put in a kobold box. So that's the origins of all that. So I put that in the End of Kings. So I've tried to get, where possible, to go all the way back as far as I could to where all these creatures that you find in other games, like bugbears, hobgoblins are good creatures. Hobgoblins, literally, they live by the hob in your kitchen. They love things. And if I was to push the hobgoblin into the modern world, they're the ones that become the gremlins in aircraft, because they're fascinated by human technology and human invention.
It's almost like gnomes, you know, the creation of gnomes and their fascination with technology.
Yeah. So I mean, as for the dwarf, it literally is made of mud. The dwarf is an elemental being. In the game, heaven forbid you wake them up, but I do have giants, I do have dragons, but they are literally the size of hills, and if you wake them up, you'll literally see the hill come to life. It's close to that film Trolls, that came out a few years ago.
Yeah, oh, that was the one. Where was that set? I watched that. It was one troll running them up, basically, and they had to get lights and all sorts to try and deal with it.
But there was another one before that, which was found footage.
Oh, Troll Hunter.
Yeah.
I loved that movie.
I loved it.
And people absolutely detested it. I'm like, that was so much fun.
But for me, it got close to me to what giants should be like. I don't like the D&D troll. I don't like the idea of you can chop a hand off and it regenerates and all that nonsense. It doesn't fit. I prefer the trolls to be the things you see under bridges, if you know. But the point is, getting it back to the horror side of it. If you really thought about what you were imagining here, you would be terrified. And one of the things that I purposely did in End of Kings, when I first started writing it, I was modeling it quite a lot on Call of Cthulhu. And then I realized, from advice from other people, but for myself as well, that one, I didn't want the characters to go mad and die, because I think that's a really pathetic way of finishing any game. oh, you've gone insane, somebody shoots you in the head. You know, it's like, really? I want them to feel as if they can. I've even got rules for.
I think the problem with Call of Cthulhu is, and we play it quite a lot, is people that take it literally.
Yes.
And once again, that's not embracing the storytelling element.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, of course, you're going to get shaken. You see an elemental being, you see a transdimensional monster that just wants to eat you. Of course, you're going to be warped about. You're going to go a little bit screwy.
Yeah.
But you don't have to instantly go to 11. You can have a drink problem. You can need a light on. You know, you can't sleep with the lights off. You know, there's other ways to.
I didn't exactly cut out the whole chapter to do with. I called it stability, and I didn't cut out the whole chapter on that in the book, but I called it trauma, and it's the equivalent of, I suppose, the D&D version where you make a save versus trauma. If you're a soldier that's been in the 30-year war that was going on in Europe and come back and see a battlefield of dead people, you're going to go, oh, that's a shame.
Yeah. And
if you're somebody that's never seen a dead body before, you'll be having nightmares. But you also believe that the priest can help you because their spells, their prayers, they call them prayers, they're just like spells, their prayers can help you. So you've got that side of it as well. What happens in most villages in the game is they've got a sort of 2-stroke power system. You've got the priest. He advocates Christ. He advocates the Protestant church. He might advocate the Catholic Church if he's a bit naughty. I'm trying to follow the religious aspects of the period. But there's also the cunning folk. The cunning folk is the wise old woman. It doesn't have to be a woman. It can be a man, and it could be of any age. And she's the one that in reality used to be responsible for stuff like blessing the crops, looking after childbirth, all that sort of stuff. She was good with medicine. I've lifted them. So when it worked really well, they worked in partnership. If it was about childbirth, the priest would go and see her down the road. And if it was something spiritual, she would say, go and talk to the priest about that. And when it works really well.
And we encountered that when we played the session. So we had a cunning folk, we had the vicar, we met them and treated them as they were. Once again, I can see that being an inspiration from Discworld.
Yes.
Because you've got the witches and then you've got God's Alley, and it's all very matter of fact, blasé. And I think that's almost an idealistic way to view the world, as in, yes, you do your thing, I do mine. However, when things go out of balance, that's where strife happens.
And that's what a lot of the adventures that I've written are about, that when it stops going well, when it stops falling apart. In the first adventure, in this book, there's an adventure called 5 Lords Are Leaping, and it starts off with the local cunning folk being imprisoned. And I'm not going to spoiler it, but it's literally to get her out of the way so she won't get involved. So they've sent, as part of the fact of spellcasting and the fact that there's literally people in most towns and villages that can do it, the only way that the crown could actually gain some form of control over it is by having it being licensed, and it was licensed through the church. And so any spellcaster of any sort, they would have to go to not just the local village church, they'd have to go to the local town or city, to the cathedral, they'd have to pay a tithe, they'd have to say, I'm a spellcaster, this is what I do, and I agree to these rules. Okay, and and if there was any idea that this wasn't going to happen, there was a group called the Intelligencers. And the Intelligencers were basically hired by the local nobility to sniff out unlicensed spellcasters and any form of evil going on. The point is, the Intelligencers themselves were totally corrupt. So
nobody suspects the Intelligencers.
Exactly.
Doesn't have a ring to it.
So I've tried where possible to say, this is actually what happened. This is what they were actually scared of. What if it was real? What would be the ramifications? Now, one of the other interesting things I realized quite recently is the major sources of magical energy come through rips in the veil. And where there are permanent rips in the veil, Paleolithic people have put henges, okay, as forms of valves or stopcocks for this endless amounts of magical power. And so Stonehenge, Avebury rings, all these, they've become these massive, if you like, generators of endless magical energy. And so right the way back from the 1400s, I suppose, thinking about it, probably from the time that William the Conqueror turned up, they started fortifying them. So places like Stonehenge in my game have got massive curtain.
Look what they're able to do in Halloween 3 with a couple of shards. The absolute carnage with just a couple of slivers.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So it's well, this is one of the interesting things is like, what if somebody found there's a few, nothing's perfect, and all it takes is one idiot with one promise of power to completely rip open a town. And so I want there to be this sense that here's normality. Everything's balanced, everything's fine. But if you just put a foot wrong, if somebody does one stupid thing, then literally hell will break loose. And for me, that is going back to the whole point of this particular blog. That's where horror is. It's not so much horror, but fear.
Yep. Are you familiar with Raymond D. Feist?
Yes. Yes.
A lot of it, the great one. That was always the mad gods,
Yes.
Every time some warlock or wizard got an idea of, I'm going to create my power base, they almost basically start poking at this god. And not just like the whole Rift War series, and that was about, it's not just about one world or multiple worlds. It's like the fabric of reality.
It is.
When you start waking these things up and calling them towards you.
And being the creative person that I am, I've had to then sort of like create the cosmic reality to the point where I've got a whole series of Dungeons and Dragons adventures already written, and it's a place called Thorunbad. And in my brain, I've already figured out how Thorunbad links up with Earth and the End of Kings. So in my creative universe, they are actually in the same reality, but no, I don't know if it'll ever happen. I actually don't want it to happen, but it is there. But
slight tangent, because that's you expect the way Wizards of the Coast going at the moment, they'll be kicking your door in.
You've got the Veil.
Sure. Do you remember what they did with that wee guy over Magic the Gathering cards?
Oh, good God, Magic the Gathering. God
no,
bless
but they were proper. I can't even remember what he did. It was really minor.
Yeah.
He reviewed before the release. That's what it was. He was given pre-release.
Oh, God,
and it was like
yes.
6 hours or something. Something stupid like 6 hours before.
They got the guys round to force him to give them all back, didn't they?
Yeah, but they were going to take everything from, as in they were going to sue him into oblivion.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, steady on.
It's only a game. What are you doing? Oh dear. So no, okay. So based on I've created. You've got heaven and hell. You've got purgatory. So on those lines, I'm sort of agreeing with the Catholic view.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you've got the veil, which is like this membrane that surrounds everything in what I call the mundane world, is our everyday life. Us as humans and all beings with souls, in fact, the only way we pass through the veil is once we've died and our souls travels through it. There are a whole load of creatures which are called the creatures of Saturn that can pass in and out of it without thinking about it. And they are used as familiars by cunning folk. So you'll have cats, not dogs, but you'll have cats, ferrets, frogs, crows, badgers, that sort of thing. Generally, the creatures that can go underground or up or into the air and down, they're sort of like, and there's a whole load of them that are called the creatures of Saturn that are used as familiars. The veil itself has got a veil borderland. So any soul that hasn't completely finished its task on Earth or has been prevented from going to its appointed place will linger on the veil borderland, and they'll become banshee, ghosts, vengeful spirits, that sort of stuff. So they'll pop in and out of reality depending on the time of the year. Okay. Cunning folk and warlocks can actually use this, and it's called shadow step. To actually do the same. So in D&D, I think there's ethereal travel. So it's shadow step. The full-blown one is called Ride the Dragon, and that's a spell where you can actually use the crux points, like the henges, and travel instantly from one part of the country to the other. But then you've got all sorts of other problems, because once you're traveling between those two zones, then you're vulnerable to demons and all sorts of stuff like that. So there's all sorts of stuff we can play with there. The Vale itself has within it what's called the Glimmering Lands. The Glimmering Lands is literally where all the Seelie folk and the Unseelie folk come from. So we're talking about all the elves, boggarts, all the supernatural creatures come from this place within the Vale. Okay, and then you get beyond the Vale, you've got Purgatory, and that's occupied by demons, imps, seraphim, the angelic beings. Now, I've left heaven and hell quite loose. I've said some people don't even think that heaven and hell actually are a thing. They're just the extremes of purgatory. So I've left that sort of open. I've also put in place the idea that souls, once they're in purgatory, can create thought forms. And so warlocks who are powerful enough can go through the Vale and gather forgotten occult knowledge from the thought forms of the dead. So there's all that potentially in the game. So I've as soon as I start creating logical cosmic ideas that go around it, then immediately it provides me with opportunities to create motives for people on Earth doing things. And also looking at the history of the whole of Europe, I've looked into the Ottoman Empire. The source behind warlock style magic, which is court magic, comes from the Middle East. It comes from the Hermetic and Kabbalistic sources. So it's all in these ancient tomes in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew.
That was the basis for Lovecraft's Necronomicon.
Yes.
Arab. You know, that's it. A lot of that sort of.
I've got a thing about Lovecraft. I do love him. I do love what he did. I think some of his writing was dreadful. I think, and that's why I kept reading it sometimes, because it just, as something to read, it seemed to come across as really clumsy writing. But I just kept on. I think
he was the original pulp writer.
Yes.
He was the, you know what I mean? He was the Penny Dreadful. He was the equivalent.
He was. Literally, he was, because he was, you know, obviously, apart from being mates with the guy that wrote Conan, he was also mates with Robert Bloch, who ended up doing Psycho, I think. And you keep thinking, what if he just survived past 40? Because he had a brain tumor, I think. And he could have had another 30 years of it, in which case he'd have been well into maybe the post-Second World War period, creating this stuff. And I mean, the reason why I became such a pulp hero is he didn't just write this stuff for himself, but other people were writing into his world. So in a strange way, he was doing a dry run of what ended up being Dungeons and Dragons, wasn't he? He created a mythic world that other people wrote into, and I think that's pretty amazing. But my favorite was M.R. James, and that's I don't know if you've heard of him.
I'm not familiar, no.
M.R. James, H.P. Lovecraft was a huge fan of him, and M.R. James was basically he wrote short stories, ghost stories, and Christopher Lee happened to be one of his students. And later in his years, Christopher Lee used to do these M.R. James stories every Christmas. And the thing about them is that the horror is underneath stuff. So
that's why I think we're not in a great place at the moment in storytelling in general. It's really went to the dogs.
They are rehashing tropes endlessly. If I have to see one more movie where a young couple with their family have decided to leave New York and find a house, oh my giddy aunt.
Well, stand by. There's another one of those coming out next year. The Conjuring Last Rites. I'm going to do a new one on it. That's supposed to be the final one.
The first one was fun. Took a
while to get anywhere.
Yeah.
But it followed the same trope, all those movies. Nothing. Last 15 minutes, everything happens. And you're like, oh.
Yeah. I mean, I started off. I think I said to you before. I was a massive fan when I was a kid. Pan Book of Horror. So they used to be like 30th edition, and it used to just endlessly turn out short stories of horror fiction. And then
my first one of those, I'm trying to remember now. I had a picture of an owl in the front.
Yes,
it was a brown owl, and
yeah,
there was a story. But I remember it was in the library, and it was the first time. I was about 6.
Some of them are instantly forgettable. Some of them I've still got rattling about in my brain as still quite chilling. Some of the short stories in those, so were really hit and miss. And then the next part to the equation was when this kid brought into school, I think we were about 14, and he brought into school a book on the history of horror movies. And I've still got a copy. It's over there somewhere. I've still got a copy of this book, and I flipped through, and it was just it just tickled my imagination. And I spent years trying to figure out, why am I so obsessed with the old horror movies? And I'm talking about the old ones: Nosferatu, The Vampire by Carl Dreyer, the early Universal ones, the 1930 to 35 ones, particularly Carl Dreyer's Vampire. And it's partly because you're never quite sure what's going on, but it is so bloody creepy. It really is. And I think I realized that, like all the classic horror stories, it's a question of what if we step too far in that direction and we find that that's real, how do we cope?
You let the genie out of the bottle and it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, I mean, that's the very first great science fiction novel, which is Frankenstein, and it was a science fiction novel, is literally asking that question: what if you do the unthinkable?
What if you stream on, because we do topical conversations now and again, we discussed the morality, horror and morality, and the fact that horror tales are a moral story. They're the earliest moral story, the earliest warnings for society.
Yes, absolutely. They all the best ones are.
Don't go off the beaten path.
Yeah, and
you don't explain why. There's a monster there.
Yeah,
kids learn to stay on the path. Don't go to the well
all the way back to Red Riding Hood. All the way back to Red Riding Hood, which is, by the way, a international story. They found versions of it in China. So it's one of those stories that probably goes back. I think there's somewhere online where you can look up how old they think some of these stories are. And I think the Red Riding Hood story must go back a couple of thousand years, because literally most countries in the world have got versions of it.
Yeah, horror is closest to the human condition.
Yes.
It really is.
Yes.
And that's where, that's why I kind of despair at the moment with the modern, the sort of trivialization of it. And I think there is a yearning to go back to basics.
It's got to.
From people, people know they're missing out on something, and it's deeper than just getting a quick fright.
We've got desensitized by extreme, and it's no longer horror at all. It's a ghoulish sense of voyeurism, which is a different thing. And there's no sense of there but for the grace of God go I, even. It's like, oh, look, somebody's dying in a car crash. The artist Andy Warhol pointed that out, because a lot of his pictures to do with death, including the one of the electric chair and the one of the car crash, are literally mass-produced images, and that's the point that he's making. We're taking things that in themselves are extreme tragedies and really horrible things, and we are commercializing them, turning them into a commodity, and then selling them for the salacious voyeurism of the public. And so horror has disappeared. We've lost that sense of genuine fear that it can happen to us, that if we're not careful, it does. I'll tell you what, the new stuff, though, the new stuff that is ticking the box a bit, and it's in the young generation. It starts off with my youngest daughter and Creepy Pasta, The Slender Man, and was it Siren Head? The Mothman, sort of like
Yeah, the whole
Yeah,
sort of Mothman
and
story.
it's
Yeah.
urban mythology, true crime stuff, and this is where everyone's going. They're trying to get back to, oh my god, it could be real.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Actually, the
trying to,
urban legends, that was an attempt,
yeah,
late 90s, early 2000s, to try and rejuvenate that.
yes,
And then, in fact, that was one of the reasons behind the Candyman. No, because
Candyman's.
the
I like
Candy,
Candyman.
but based on the Forbidden, obviously,
Yeah.
Very British story, the horror of the council estate. And I grew up
Yes.
in one, so I know exactly. I was quite tame compared to some places I've been, but they then brought that into the modern world and took the culture at the time, which was the urban legends. And I think that was that was almost like a mini renaissance
It
of
was.
creativity.
That's
And
what I'm
then
saying.
something went wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it does very quickly because of the nature of now we've got global instant social media. We've got a situation where everything gets desensitized instantly. If by some awful happen chance, somebody managed to catch a video of somebody having their head removed, then that will flood the internet. And I think there's something really, it's beyond the distasteful quality of that, and it's sort of like I don't know. It just misses everything. It misses that
God, I'm
sense.
trying to remember that movie. Fella, God, I've reviewed it as well, where he kidnaps people and basically has the cameras on them, and the more people click, the more the timer went down.
Oh, Hell's Teeth. Well, there was an early one. Yeah.
What did call her? Helen Hunt was in it.
Yeah. I
can't remember
remember
the name of the film now, but that was it. It was just sort of shine the mirror up to.
Well, one of the ones that became very notorious, which is I think from the 1960s in this country, was Peeping Tom, and that had that same element, and that's interesting that goes back that far. Peeping Tom was, I think it ruined the people that made it. They're the same people that made Matter of Life and Death. I can't remember the guy's name, but there was this amazing two guys that made amazing films. I mean, Matter of Life and Death, I think, is one of the best films ever made. The other one, not Tales of the Unexpected. Come on, can't remember it.
No, they were funny, quirky little episodes, weren't they? And they were just about just before the watershed as well.
Yeah, Roald Dahl. I'm thinking of one. It's God, I can't remember it. It's all set in a cottage. It's a British horror movie. There was one Night of the Demon, which is a remake of an M.R. Jones story, which was called Casting the Room, and that's the story of basically a demon, a bloke that worships the devil, and he wants to publish this book. And the publisher refuses to publish it because he thinks it's nonsense. So he sends him like a black spot and says, in such and such days' time, the demon will come and get you. And the only way, and the guy suddenly goes, well, this is nonsense. And then he realizes it isn't. And he finds out that the only way he can stop this demon actually getting him, if he somehow allows the guy that sent it to willingly accept the spot back. And that's what the film is, and it's a really brilliant British horror movie. But there was a that's the sort of stuff I'm after. It's not about the actual seeing the demon is actually a letdown at the end.
It's never measures up to what you imagine, and that's one of my issues today with a lot of movies.
Yeah,
the imagination, the bit of dread that don't give the audience the respect or even the moment to fill in the blanks themselves. Look what's happening with the Alien universe. They are twisting it around. They're explaining everything. They're prequeling it in, and they're trying to tie this bit up to that. And they've condensed. Where the first movie was, and I would say it's as much H.R. Geiger's brainchild. Ridley Scott was brought in last minute. I hate that guy. But the whole idea was we're going deeper out. We don't know what's out there. It could be anything, and they just could not think beyond that little bubble. And now it's even worse. They're just going back in on themselves. The role-playing game is fantastic.
The first Alien film goes all the way back to the old dark house. It goes back to, it's the original concept of enclose everybody in a space, have an invisible monster. And it's all about how they react. And it was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It literally was a remake of an old black and white horror movie put on a spaceship, and I just loved that. The film I was thinking of was Dead of Night, by the way, which is a quartet of short stories, and it included Michael Redgrave, and he did the first iteration of the ventriloquist taking over. And it's absolutely terrifying, and it's what, again, I'd say one of the best horror movies made. It really is good, because I think the actors took it really seriously. They took it. I think that was part of it as well. Something that Lon Chaney Jr. said about modern horror movies: the problem with them is that you can tell that the actors are not taking it seriously. And back when I was making them, I took it seriously.
Yeah. Well, Lon Chaney Jr., Bela Lugosi. In fact, one of my favorites of all time is Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein.
I love that.
But Bela Lugosi, Lon Chaney Jr., Boris Karloff, they played it straight.
Boris Karloff.
They played it straight. And Bud Abbott and Louis Costello, they did their bit, and it worked. I don't know how, but it
I think some of the best actors, full stop, on movies of any type. I'd say Boris Karloff, Peter Cushing, and Christopher Lee.
Oh, we covered Steve and I. We do classic horror every second Monday. We covered the Amicus series, and there's a lot of those movies Peter Cushing saved.
Oh God!
If Peter Cushing hadn't been in them,
absolutely. There's one called The Skull, isn't there? And the reptile and.
But Peter Cushing would play a bin man. He'd play a bartender. He'd play he would just morph into that role.
Oh God! There's one where he's a shopkeeper, and there's another one where you've got a quartet of short stories.
Yeah, it's the Tales from the Crypt. It's
Tales from the Crypt. Yes.
Yeah, Tales from. No, sorry, it's the one after. Tales from the Crypt. It's the last Amicus movie.
Yeah.
Where he plays the antique store, and basically only one person survives because they were honest when they came in.
Yes, that's it.
Everyone else tried to diddle him.
That's it. And I love, there's that one line that in his voice he said, "Money is the root of all evil." He says, and he just says it with such a wonderful, absolutely brilliant. I love it. So so that's the vibe. I want Nosferatu vibe. I want Carl Dreher's Vampire, where everything is just suggested. If you haven't seen Carl Dreher's Vampire, it's a treat, because it's sort of like you're never quite sure what you're looking at, but somehow it's so unnerving because of that. I think the original Nosferatu, even the normal characters in it are scary, and it feels like found footage because of how.
Well, Hutton's a bit of a strange guy anyway.
Yes.
You know what I mean? He's not somebody you would leave your wallet laying around, or your wife.
No.
He's a bit ruthless himself. Like,
yes. Yeah.
If it wasn't for the fact that he was dealing with a vampire, he was a bit of a formidable character.
Yes. But gosh, yeah. So there's my. I'm getting back onto the thread a bit. That's where
we know here. That's one thing we do here as tangents. I told you at the start.
I'm trying to plug something. Right. No, that's me. That's my horror. So I realised that when I think my mum approached my English teacher, and when I was about 15, and said he's still really obsessed by those horror movies, because every summer they used to do a double bill over the summer of an old horror movie and a modern one. So you'd have Bride of Frankenstein followed by The Crazies, which is a 1970s one where the water gets polluted and old granny starts stabbing people with knitting needles and stuff. And I would watch them. I would be like fascinated, and I'd actually have a cassette player, and I'd recall all the title music for all the horror movies to play back, because this was pre-digital age. This was like, and it made me think, well, why am I so interested in it all? And it's because it's right on the edge of our imaginations. It's right on the edge of what makes us feel safe. And I think that, for me, is what I need to keep touching in. The problem with a lot of horror movies, they're so far beyond the edge of what makes you feel safe that it loses, you just don't relate. And so what you're looking at is, you're looking at a film because it's a sequel of another film. Let's see how they kill people this time. There's no actual personal involvement beyond, oh, look, they did a special effect and somebody's guts have been ripped out. I mean, The Thing did that beautifully.
Oh, yeah, that was
Masterpiece.
I still haven't bothered with the. I've heard it's all right, but I didn't bother with the prequel.
I haven't,
because they originally shot it with practical effects, then they overdid it with CGI, and you're like, why?
Yeah. I've actually got in my latest adventure called The Wreck. I've actually got a nod towards the thing.
Is that you were mentioning? Is that the follow-on to the one shot we played?
The Wreck is Wreck. It can be.
You said that was related to something later on.
It's related. The Wreck is a unusual one. This is an unusual one because it started off with a real event. The wreck started off in 1643. There was a ship called the Santa Ana, and I've looked into it, and for some really weird reason, it left Dunkirk with a shipment of troops and officers and their families, plus cannon, plus black powder, plus all the weapons. And for some reason, it didn't go up the English Channel towards Antwerp. It actually did a tour via the Irish Sea. Now, the only thing I can imagine is that they were dropping something off in Ireland. I don't know. But they did a tour up the Irish Sea, got past the Isle of Man, and then they crashed into, for some reason, the pilot had perhaps died. And you go up beyond Morecambe to the River Wyre near Fleetwood, and the sandbanks there are notorious. They go out for maybe a mile into the sea, and the Santa Ana crashed onto it, managed to drag itself towards the coastline, and then it started setting cannon shot off. And the locals thought there was a sea battle for a while. Then after about a day, they looked out and they saw this ship. So they started getting all the troops and all the sailors off the ship, leaving the officers and the wives. And then, because we were in the middle of a civil war at the same time, you've now got a Spanish galleon filled with cannon, black powder, ammunition, muskets, armor. It's like, this is a pot of gold. And the royalists and the parliamentarians, that was two sides in the Civil War, found out about it at the same time. And then it became like a Keystone Cop race. Who could get there first? And you had Lord Strang, who was a royalist, the Earl of Derby, and he took about 50 men as quickly as they could from Latham all the way up the coast. And get this, the guy in charge of the parliamentarians was called Captain Sparrow. I love it. I think he was Sergeant Major Sparrow. We don't know his first name. And for some really weird reason, he took the other side of the river. So he's the wrong side of the river and went up the coast, realized that the ship was about half a league that way and he couldn't get to it. Strang was Earl of Derby was so scared that the parliamentarians were on his heels that he managed to get the officers off, got a little bit of stuff that they could carry, and then blew the ship up. Okay.
Not realizing he had the whole thing to himself.
The story gets even funnier because at the time, the parliamentarians had got Lancaster, and all they need to do is get a load of boats from Lancaster and sail along, and they hauled up all the cannon off the seabed, took them back to Lancaster, and stuck them on the battlements of Lancaster, stopping the royalists retaking it. So that's the story. What I've done, so it starts off with reality.
Mm-hmm.
Then I threw in the Demeter out of Dracula. So the Santa Ana is no longer there because a pilot has died. It's there because they've got some sort of unholy monster on board, which was going to get used in the 30-Year War. In this case, it's a demon in a box that the captain decided to open because he wasn't informed. So basically, by the time the ship's crash landed, it's filled with dead people. And all of them have been died by suicide, killing each other, or insanity. Okay. And so that's the basis of the story. I have then thrown in the Midwich Cuckoos, which is a John Wyndham story. What happened to the demon after it had finished? Like Dracula, what happened to because he's the former Dracula, what did he do next? Found the nearest village, decided to start feasting. So it's a massive adventure, and I've sort of just finished writing it because it's a demon of sleep. The whole village goes to sleep, and everybody within it is succumbing to probably the worst nightmares imaginable.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that the adventurers can stop it is by actually walking into the nightmare. And so that's where I throw the creature out of the thing in it a little bit. It's not as, it can't keep shape changing,
but it
has that vibe.
I can see it. No, that's
so compared to the quick game that you played.
Oh yeah, but we were only doing a demo, you know what I mean, a one shot.
Oh, absolutely.
Already my imagination. That's why I wanted to talk to you, because
yeah,
I was asking even during the game. I was like, "Oh, there's a lot of horror elements here. Oh, there's a lot. I can just see on the edge where you could go." And I'm like, "Oh, I haven't felt this, you know."
And I've tried to be as sort of like, I think a lot of horror is about anticipation. The alien works really well because you haven't seen the creature yet.
Mm-hmm.
You just get hints of it. You get the odd drip of acid. You get and so in these stories, in these adventures I've written, I've tried to. There's a perfect, one of the best little scenes in any horror movie is the pub scene in American Werewolf in London.
The slaughtered lamb. Yep.
Yeah.
Ian Abramson was meant to be there, but he thought it was a joke. And Rick Mail went anyway.
Rick Mail was brilliant in it, wasn't
Ian Abramson still kicks himself to this day. He's like, I could have been in that movie, but I thought they were taking the mick.
If you watch that scene, you can see it on YouTube. It's textbook. I show my students, because it's not got horror in it. I show my students at school. If you want to know about tension, if you want to know about the build-up of horror, without actually showing it, watch that scene, because it goes from them walking in, and almost like in a Universal horror movie, everybody shuts up and turns and looks.
But I've been in those sort of bars.
Yes.
No, I mean, it's like the piano music starts.
Yeah.
They stop. They smell the different DNA, you know, and like
me and my wife did in Wales. We swear that we walked into this bar where everyone was speaking English, and as soon as we walk in, we couldn't understand anything they were saying because they suddenly switched to Welsh. just sort of like, foreigners, come on. But then it does this really beautifully slowly, where Brian Glover tells this really bad joke, and it lasts about 4 or 5 minutes, and you as a viewer sort of like really relaxed, going, okay. But while that's happening, there's a little moment where one of the American guys notices a pentagon on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so beautifully done, because in the middle of all the laughter and everyone's relaxed, he says, what about the pentagon on the wall? And then suddenly it flips into something extremely serious. And I don't know how the director managed it, but it flipped from being almost a cartoon caricature of an English pub to the best version of Jonathan Harker being warned about Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In that story, where suddenly they go, I best you leave, but may God go with you. And it's suddenly really like, oh my God. And that sense, and that is pure. And hopefully I try and get that in the games that I've written.
Actually we had the Oscars come after the channel, because I reviewed it with Steve, and we were sitting going on about things, and we we're talking about how The American Werewolf in London was like the first horror movie to get an Oscar, for special effects. And we actually, I found, we were just having a conversation. I pulled it up and we we're going through it, and you could just see the rest of the establishment handing this award out through gritted teeth.
They
despised it, and you could just see them going, "Oh!" But what they put up against, they were showing like Wizard of Oz and the green makeup of the Wicked Witch of the West. You're like, apples and oranges. There's not even comparison. And like people putting a bit of fake tan on, it was nothing compared to what there's something about the horror mindset. There's something about that really goes into the lizard part of your brain.
And there's something about the fact that it's not CGI. I think that's really important. I think one of the scariest bits in Poltergeist is when the demon comes out of the cupboard, and it's obviously a puppet. which has all been lit properly, but it's obviously, as a special effect, a puppet. And for some reason, for me, that made it even scarier. The fact that it looked like a puppet special effect made it scarier. If it had been CGI'd, it wouldn't have done it.
Yep. But how many haunted doll stories are there? What, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Think of dolls, old dolls. Somebody will take them and put a tea lamp in them and stuff. And the most frightening things ever. There's something about it's back to the golem, isn't it? It's that idea of the inanimate object becoming alive.
Yes.
Like that is something in the back of our brains that we are terrified
of.
Goes
all the way back to Greek mythology and Pygmalion and stuff like that, which is where this guy carves this figure and it comes to life. And it's all about the idea of and again, it's Frankenstein again. I'm going to be presumptuous enough to do something only God can do, which is create life.
For I have become God, you know.
But also,
contentious line in all of literature, because that was a good 100 odd years, wasn't it? That was a problem, at least.
Yeah.
One line, and it was in context, and Mary Shelley wasn't saying this was a good thing he was doing.
No.
Once again, the horror story is the moral story of do not do this because it doesn't go well.
It's called Frankenstein's subtitle is a modern Prometheus, because it's literally a moral warning.
You're stealing from the gods, you know.
When Robert Louis Stevenson wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it's quite famous how he did it, because he had a horrific nightmare. He was never without illness as a person, and he had this horrific nightmare and immediately wrote it down on paper, and I think it took him about 2 to 3 weeks to write it. And he showed it to his wife, and his wife said, "This doesn't have a moral. Could you actually rewrite it so it's got a moral element?" So he then rewrote it, and I think he took about 6 weeks to rewrite it. And then it basically made him for the rest of his life. And it's again because it needs that moral element. And everything that I do, I want players to fall into the trap of the cliche. I love playing with stereotypes. I love playing with cliches because I twist them. I sucker the players into the cliche, and then I invert them so that the good guy that you think was the good guy is actually the bad guy. But if you look down underneath it all, there's a good reason why he's a bad guy. Yep. You know, I love that sort of like keeping people guessing, people saying, who's the actual monster here? And I think that's where stuff like Frankenstein, the actual monster is the doctor. You know,
obviously, you know,
and I'm not, and at the same time, for God's sake, this is a game. This is supposed to be fun. This is, I mean, it's one of my mottos for any role-playing game. Please have a fight within the first 10 minutes. Please get the dice rolling. The players want to have some fun. They want to kill a few things. They want to get the experience points, or they want to gain some levels in something. They want to feel as if they've taken part in it, and then we can settle down into the role play and start getting immersed in it. But please get something going right from the start. It is a game.
I think we should bring a point up here, because a lot of people who maybe aren't familiar, people will be on this channel maybe not familiar with role-playing games, even though I do cover quite a bit. We're currently playing Workborg at the moment, so we play on the channel, but it's not everything. But role-playing is not acting. No. People get very wound up, and I think people are very reticent to come forward and try role-playing games because they think you have to be an actor. And there's always one person in the group can do voices, and then people feel intimidated, think, oh, that's the standard, you have to be this. And that's completely missing the point of theatre of the mind.
Yes, yeah.
And it's back that we're talking about traditions. You know, Christmas, for example, was the traditional time. Ghost stories and scary stories were told.
Yes.
That's been lost.
Yes. Well, that's where M.R. James comes back in. I've already mentioned
Which is funny enough. I was about to mention him again because Chris just asked some of your favourite creators, but to say M.R. James, you know, it's...
Yeah. Montague Rhodes James. He's definitely my favourite because he's underneath the skin. He's literally, most of the stories revolve around somebody digging a little bit too deeply into an old book. Somebody testing something which shouldn't be tested, something, you know. There's only one time where you get a genuine Lovecraftian moment, and that's where somebody finds that there's a monk from about 300 before has put the abbey's treasure down a well in a secret hole, and this guy goes down it on a rope, and he reaches in, and something reaches out, but he never fully describes it. And it's that for me is that tingle is that moment, that tingle of, and I think what's his name? Can't remember his name. Jonathan Miller. He did, which is on YouTube. Whistle and I'll Come Running. It's got Michael Hordern in it, and it perfectly describes to me what horror is. A bloke finds an old piece of bone in a sand dune. He notices it's got holes in it, so he blows it just for fun. And then he walks back to the hotel, and in the background on the horizon, there is what looks like a disembodied curtain, just out of focus. And it's almost laughable. It looks just like a disembodied curtain. And as he's walking, he sort of turns around a bit, and you see the look on his face change slightly, and he starts trotting. And then the next shot has this disembodied curtain about 200 yards from him instead. And it's that thing that from childhood, I can remember it this time of the year, coming home from school at night, and it's getting dark. And however intelligent and grown up I am, I have to run to get to the nearest light source, because I used to take this shortcut to get home. And the light sources, and however logical I was, as soon as I got into the dark patches, that fear of something would come up in me. And that's what I'm tapping into. And that's what M.R. James taps into. And then to actually, the first story I had published was called The Spider. And it's set in World War I. And you've got this guy who's obviously suffering from shell shock. And he's an artist. And he gets obsessed by the artistry of spiders and starts studying them. And then he won't leave his studio, and his wife's getting worried, so he sends somebody in, and the guy's vanished. And you walk into the studio, and he's got string round the whole studio as if it's a giant web. And wall ceiling, there's pictures of webs and spiders and strange Aztec script. Yeah. and he goes off his rocker and but the original one actually had a Aztec god turn up, the spider god. And when I sent it to go into this short story anthology, they wrote back and said, "Could you remove the last bit, please? It's scarier without it." So, and they were right. The best part of that story was the fact that right at the end of the story, you're looking at it and going, was that all in his head? Or wasn't it? Which brings me to one of the other great later horror films, Peter Lorre's Beast with Five Fingers, which is all in his head. And through the whole movie, you've got this disembodied, almost comical hand murdering people.
Yeah, but gotta remember that one.
But there's something about it. There's something about it that works. It really, and when you realize it's in his head, it's just terrifying. And that's what I'm trying to tap into. So I think horror is literally all the time in The End of Kings. There's just beyond the edge, there is something if you go the wrong direction, really.
Because obviously recently when you ran the game, it was online.
Yeah.
And obviously, like myself, you started out physically,
yes.
around the table.
Yes.
How have you found the experience, sort of pros and cons of each, and also has it had any influence on the game? Are you factoring that in now, The End of Kings?
I haven't factored anything in. What it reminded me straight away, obviously, from 1979 when I first started DMing, the whole point was that we can share whiskey across the table, or bags of crisps, and make lunch, and that gets shared, and that was all part of the process. It was and the peripheral vision wasn't a rectangle, and there was an awful lot of stuff that could happen, and also there wasn't a sense of time constraints or anything like that when you're playing with real people. However, the opportunity of playing with complete strangers from around the world, the opportunity of meeting complete strangers from around the world, the opportunity of sharing things with people that you don't know or people from other cultures, that you get each other. You actually know what each other are talking about, and you've never met each other. But this is remarkable. The first time I really felt it was when I went to GaryCon, and there was over 1,000 people in this hotel, and I could go up to the bar and talk and randomly talk to a stranger about the qualities of gnome armor. And we'd immediately have a chat about it without even thinking we were being weird.
Yeah.
But the other thing, one of the things I immediately loved during COVID, my mate was stuck in Yarmouth, 180 miles from me. And I had written COVID. I had the opportunity to write, so I did an awful lot of writing. I wrote 2 Dungeons and Dragons games, and I wrote one of the End of Kings games as well. And I could play test them with my mate. The fog of war. Oh my god! So I used Roll20 for that, and the idea. It worked.
No. I've been spoiled in Foundry, so you can't look at Roll20 the same way. Would you? Even Owlbear.
Keep it simple, right? Yeah, Owlbear I use with you guys, and what I used it for was really basic: a fog of war. The idea that I could have a beautiful map that I could reveal one little bit at a time. And for me, that's changed quite a lot. It's a very simple, seemingly unimportant thing, but the idea that I could reveal things to you guys a little bit at a time, and it would have a quality to it. I mean, I think if I was in control of everything, I would probably include some more sound effects.
Mm-hmm.
I know that when I played one of the games in GaryCon, there was a guy called Bob Brinkman, and at GaryCon, it finishes Sunday afternoon. And then there's 3 or 4 of the hardened players that hang around in the hotel, and we had a race to see who could be the very last game. So Bob Brinkman ran this Call of Cthulhu game, and throughout the whole game, he had a CD or some sort of digital device playing music, and it worked. It was this sort of background throb going throughout the whole thing, and he changed his DMing according to the music stuff going on, and so there's elements of that I could bring in. So I can see there's so many possibilities. So yeah, but no, I mean, obviously I run 3 D&D, 2 D&D, 1 End of Kings sessions every week at the school, and the point is you've got year 7 to year 9 all interacting with each other, all having fun together. None of the year 9s going, you're just a year 7. Mm-hmm. As far as they're concerned, that's and the thing is, it's not just about the game, it's about their social gathering. And I think that's the one big thing that I love about playing in the flesh. It's a social gathering. Mm-hmm. Whereas with all the best will in the world, I mean, I could try and offer you a drink.
Yeah, but it's would have to do the sort of camera effect to bring it in. And,
Yes. but there's just that one element. But I think there's pros and cons. I know that there's an awful lot of people that prefer online now. And it has crossed my mind to actually have a tabletop game. And I know some people do this as well, and actually have a digital interface with the actual map on a screen in front of everybody.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Has it,
yeah.
Once you see the possibilities, and then people they want to create a module, then the module gets sold as well as the plug into like the Roll20 or Foundry or Owlbear, and
it's made me look at the editing of the books. It's made me look at the value of the maps and what they're used for as a practical thing. So there's certain elements in that if I'm going to put it on a screen, people with different types of monitors are going to have to see it. So it's made me try to clarify things a little bit more, and obviously streamline things, because I don't want to. I mean, right now with us talking, I'm not really looking at any scripts. We're just chatting.
Yeah.
But in a game where you've got 3 hours. Mm-hmm. I'd love to be able to do that in the game, but we can't.
I don't think we've ever, we've had one shots. I think you're one of the few people who've actually had a one shot be a one shot. because especially over an IMT, one shot turns into about 4 sessions.
The next one,
and that's just the way. We don't get precious about it, because that's about the experience.
The next one we're doing, which is going to be a humdinger, that I can guarantee is not a one shot.
Yeah,
and because I'm just so excited about but I know that the first section of this dungeon is so much fun, and gets into the meat of what End of Kings is about. And I've realised that each of the adventures that I've written have focused on different aspects of what the game can do, and that's one of the things I've wanted to do. So the first one is the things I'm looking for. The very first one that was independent of the core rule books is based on the Curse of the Werewolf, Oliver Reed. It's based on that
covered up 2 weeks ago. Absolutely brilliant. One of his best movies, I think.
I agree with you. I mean, that shows you what he was capable of as an actor. Mm-hmm. Wow. God, what a! I mean, he lived his life.
We covered we're actually doing the Hammer series of films, so I think we just did The Damned. Yeah. And God, Oliver Reed looked confused in that movie. We were confused too. As to where's the plot? We couldn't find it for about 45 minutes.
No.
But Christopher Movie's
there's one which is based on the Magnificent Seven. So that's that. So I realised with the first one that I'd written.
I take it you mean Enid Blyton, not the Westerns.
Definitely the Westerns. Definitely the
Westerns. The West. Right. Okay.
Not the fact, your famous five. Timmy, put that zombie down.
One of my favourite crossovers ever has to be Scooby-Doo and Supernatural.
Oh, absolutely. We've just finished watching it from end to end, the whole lot.
Oh,
we've just finished watching it, and it's and how did it work? It should have failed about halfway through, but for some reason they made it work because they hit the nail on the head with the characters. They really did. I mean, sometimes you could see how ragged the plot line had become and how repetitive it had become, but you kept watching it, and I adored it, and I adored the characters. And I think it's partly down to the fact that the actual actors loved being there. I think it had a lot to do with that. You could feel it. The actual actors loved being there, But so the Magnificent Seven, i.e. the idea, because I realised the first one, like the one that you played, you could theoretically avoid any combat. Mm-hmm. And fine.
And we did. We avoided.
I've also put in the rules the idea of surrender. By the way, one thing that I'm going to shoehorn in here, that in a lot of role-playing games, you've got 100 hit point, 20th level fighter, and he's down to 2 hit points, and he's still fighting like everything's fine. Oh my God, really? And people have tried to make some sort of reasoning around that, but it's nonsense. In this one, you have a fixed number of hit points, and they don't get any bigger unless you're using some sort of magic to temporarily enhance them. So when you get down to 4 or 5 hit points from 13, then you're badly injured. And I've created a rule system that accounts for that. And most of the time, if you're against a human enemy, then most of the time, if you won't, I surrender, I give in. And it's pretty much because we want the narrative to work.
Because then you get captured, you get taken somewhere else. The story progresses.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean it's the end of the story.
I want us to get past that silliness. I want to get past that idea that everyone's out to kill you, particularly if it's not in their advantage. If you're somebody of reputation in the real world, then they'd have tried their best not to kill you because they'd have ransomed you. So it's sort of, there's an awful lot of things that you can do, and it provides so many opportunities, that idea. So I've put certainly the non-player characters, they will, if they get down to low hit points, try and surrender. And it's up to you as players to sort of, how are you going to treat that? And if you go around just killing them afterwards, then you'll get that reputation. And indeed, even though there's a civil war going on, the law is still there as well. And eventually you'll be considered to be bandits or outlaws just going around murdering people. So I want that to be an element. Okay, so that's...
Have you because one thing that frustrates me about D&D is actually the alignments.
Yes.
You are so rigidly stuck into lawful good, blah blah blah. I find that so restrictive. Lacking of common sense. Where the way you've just described it,
there's an awful lot of stuff in D&D that works well if you treat it as a game mechanic, but as the moment you start trying to get more nuance than that, then it falls apart. This is why I've chosen the percentage skill system in End of Kings. It's because, my God, you can have a go at anything.
Mm-hmm.
If you've been asked to sing for your tea and you've never sung before, you can have a go at it.
And you never know. You could just
you never know. You could roll that 4 or 5%. You could do that, and suddenly they go, "Oh my God, it's like a canary! Oh my God, the voice! Here's all the food that you can eat." Yep. And I want that to be a possibility, that people can always have a go at something. So that's that. Whereas in D&D for a long time they had these limited proficiencies. So even now, if I'm playing D&D, I would actually start a game off and say to the players, what do you think your character, ignore the amount of them, what do you think your character should be proficient in? Make a list, and I'll say yes and no. So it could be 20 things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll go, well, no, you won't be able to do that. You won't be able to do that. The rest of them, that's fine. So the second edition, say, you can have 5 proficiency slots, non-weapon, and 2 weapon. What a load of nonsense. So in End of Kings, any skill is any skill. So whether you're using a sword, using a musket, singing, reading Latin, you're using the same system of rolling percentage dice to see if you achieve it. It's as basic as that. Okay. And anybody gets to have a go at it. And like the Cthulhu system, at the end of the session, you roll a dice again. And if you get over your current skill score, then you've learned something new. And as obviously it gets better. So if you've got 70% in a skill, it's harder to learn anything new, because you've only got a 30% window. So it's, and I love that system. It's totally logical, makes total sense. I've got a system of the perfect one. So within 5% of your target score, whether you've and the other thing that I've done in the skills is you as a player can introduce modifiers. So for instance, if you're mixing a potion as a cunning folk, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to use water that I'm going to get that's never touched the ground, and it's coming from this particular plant, having rained, and it's a full moon. How does that affect the potion? So if the player starts doing stuff like that, the DM or the game master can go, okay, well, that'll add 20% to its success because you've tried to follow those sorts of. Do you see what I mean? So I'm aiming to create modifiers that encourage players to be immersive.
Sounds like you're trying to create storytelling again.
Of course it is.
Back to the whole start of the conversation about frustration.
It's almost fate. It's almost a fate system. It's almost a fate system. You can sort of go. I mean, I'm not going to have. I'm going to carry. I've got a dagger with me. Oh no, but you didn't have a dagger. Oh yes, the reason. Well, that's fate, isn't it? Where you can actually suddenly produce something like I've got a chicken.
Yeah.
No, it's not that bad. But there is a thing that you can say, right, if I try that, if I do that, then will that increase my chances? And I wanted that to happen. In terms of things like,
so if somebody uses a particular feather to fletch their bows,
yes,
and they find the best goose farmer, and they know these are purebred.
I've filled one section of the book with tables of components and what they're good for, from plants, trees, animal parts, human parts, and supernatural parts, and even different planets, different astrological things, and how they affect what you could do with magic. So I've put all that in place, and if people are playing a warlock or a cunning folk or a witch hunter or a priest, they could buy into that and say, look, I'm going to try doing this and see if it actually increases my chances or has an effect. And I want players to feel as if they got agency, in other words. And I think that's the problem with D&D, is it's sort of like a lot of it is railroading compared to the game that I produce, where I want players to actually have agency. but there is a firm external logic that they've got to involve themselves in, and there's a firm no when it's impossible, so it doesn't get too silly. But yeah.
Talking of agency, because you're mentioning sort of your love for Lovecraft and the fact that people wrote into it.
Yes.
Are you trying to create something similar here, where maybe you haven't thought this far ahead yet, but where other writers, other module sort of scenario creators can write into your universe? How do you plan to introduce that?
I can't wait for that to happen. I can't wait for an email to turn up where somebody that I don't know says, I've been playing this game, I've got this idea, do you mind if I write an adventure and publish it? And I just can't wait for that. I really can't. For me, that is the ultimate measure of success as a role-playing game writer. The one thing that the next stage for me in terms of my mark of success isn't necessarily selling a vast number of them. It's a DM, a game master, to contact me and say, we ran The Nature of the Beast and it went really well and I really love what you've done. Or even, we ran Nature of the Beast, we found a problem here, do you think you should change it? That's what I'm waiting for. The next thing, because so far all I've got is me DMing, and everybody, and every convention that I've ever run it at for the last 4 or 5 years, everyone's gone away going, wow, that was great. And I know it is a great product, but I'm the writer and I'm the game master.
The acid test is somebody else taking it, running it.
And that's
the stabilizer wheels sort of coming off, and
I can't. The road. So for me, in terms of testing the game, and this is why, going all the way back to the start of what we were saying, I haven't reinvented any wheels. The actual creation of a character and the skills percentage system, a lot of people that are used to role-playing games will take one look at the character sheet and go, oh, I know this. And most of the rules, they'll look at it and go, oh, yeah, that follows that. And so it's no longer about rules. It's about this. Let's get on with the game.
Yeah, we did that, I think last month with the Judge Dredd game. So we took the original Games Workshop Judge Dredd and we ran a scenario, and we just found that their combat system was really convoluted.
Yeah.
It was horrible. So what we did is we actually took the Initiative series from Alien RPG.
Yeah.
And slapped it on, and then we reran the scenario again, and it was a world of difference.
When I wrote this, I had in mind the first edition DM's guide, Gary Gygax's one, because it didn't matter what page I turned to, I wanted to keep reading. And one of the things that I was aware of is that eventually in most game systems, it all gets too complicated. People create new rules. They're constantly creating new rules. And says, what about, and then suddenly they say, well, let's have a rule for which part of the body you hit with the sword. Let's have a rule for...
Is that not the essence of any bureaucracy, though?
Yes.
Once you have a few simple guidelines.
So right from the outset, I started off with the idea that let's keep it simple. You roll percentage dice, you hit somebody, the damage you do, their armor, which is turned into a number, their armor is deducted off the damage done. And that's it. However, somebody wanting to make it a bit... the funnest things we did as in D&D games is something like a barroom brawl, using the first edition system, which is in the middle of the book. And it's about a quarter of the damage is real, and it's all percentage dice. And there's overbearing, grappling, and wrestling. So I took that and I've put that in there so that you can actually, if you realize that the enemy is superior to you, you can say, sod this, I'm just going to rugby tackle the bastard. Yeah?
Or pick up a big chair, because
yeah.
Be an equalizer.
Well, I've got a whole section of improvised weaponry, including chairs and bottles and
But like actually back to Judge Dredd again, Shuggy Room Brawl, the game.
Well, yeah. So it's all in there, but you can ignore it if you want. You can just say, I just want to keep it a simple narrative game. Let's roll a few dice for the combat. You win. Right, what are you going to do now? Or you can say, right, for the next hour or so, we're going to have a really great battle. Let's have a proper fight. I'm going to throw a fist at this guy. I know I've got a dagger in my hand, but I'm going to turn it into a knuckle duster and I'm going to whack, you know. And you can say, okay, well, there's a bit for knuckle dusters here. Let's have a look at this. Yep. So I've got it there in case.
So you're trying to do cinematic or comic book panel sort of whack, you know.
Well, yeah. The other thing, I did a bit of research into, for instance, bows. For one thing, historically, bows and arrows were sort of petering out by 1630s. And that's because it took about 10 to 15 years for somebody to train to use a bow and arrow, partly because of the muscle structure that you needed, especially with longbow.
And that was, I think I brought it up as well, that was part of the reason it was actually required by law to spend 2 hours a week practicing with the bow
and
on a Sunday after church, because that's the only way you could get people.
And that had died out because the musket became the 10 minutes to learn how to use a musket instead of 10 years, literally. And so the musket took over. Now, muskets were dreadful. They are anything beyond 50 yards. And the chance of actually hitting anything was pretty abysmal. And certainly they were used for battle because you had about 100 of these musketeers across, and the idea of all of them firing at the same time would terrify the pants off most people. The chances of them actually hitting the enemy and actually doing real damage was...
Oh, it's like the earliest artillery as well.
The earliest artillery. Now, I mean, that is serious. That is...
It was more damage to the actual drop shots.
The artillery is actually really interesting. You've heard of the phrase doing it by the numbers. That's where it comes from. Because you would have a captain of the cannon, and each person with their particular role in reloading the cannon would be given a number. So he'd just call out the numbers. He wouldn't bother with names. He'd go 1, 3, 2, 3, 4, fire. 1, 2, and he'd do it like that. And British cannoneers would get about 3 rounds off in a minute, because they were so good at it. And you've got to realize that these cannon, there was nothing inside them. Not until the Crimean War did you actually get it. They were literally solid lumps of metal or stone sometimes. And people would be killed by have a cannonball go past them. The actual air hitting them would kill them.
Yeah, the sonic sort of boom.
Yeah, and that's how they were devastating. They were truly devastating weapons. And I've gone into a lot of detail into the use of cannon.
Sorry, just talking about the Crimean War. There's a shame the naval gun race. That's a shame that went.
The Crimean War was incredible. It was the first telegraph was used to do journalism. You had steam trains being used there. You had actual shells rather than cannonballs for the first time. My 3 times great grandfather was actually at the siege of Sebastopol, and I've done quite a bit of research into that, and even to the point where I'm going, I wonder if I can turn this into a role-playing game. No. But no, seriously, I can go back to the 17th century and pretty much do something similar. There was quite a lot of sieges going on in the English Civil War, and they're just as exciting. So far, I was leading up to, I have created a battle system. There's no point in having a game that's effectively got at its heart a 30 years war going on in Europe, an English Civil War going on in this country, and not actually have a battle system. But I haven't played it out yet. I've created it. I think it will work. But the interesting thing for me as a role player, already I've described this in the game. You start off, the game is split between combat encounters and narrative encounters. So it flips. So you're sort of like, what are you going to do? I'm going to go to the pub, blah, 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 all that stuff. You see a giant rat in the road. What are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to get my sword out and start. That's a combat encounter.
Yep.
And then it goes from the combat encounter. What are you going to do? I'm going to skin the rat and then sell the fur. That becomes narrative again. And then I thought, hold on, there's a third one, and that's the battle system. And that's really weird, because suddenly you almost have to, you've got a choice. You can stay in character, and then the battle sort of becomes a environment around you. And you carry on role-playing as if you're the character in that battle. Or there's an option to pan out from that, and you take on the commander of a side.
So you're thinking almost like Warriors of Krynn?
I don't know that. I know it's in Dragonlance,
yeah.
But I've never played
so that's
that.
Where you step in a role-playing game, you go into the combat system,
and
then the outcome of the combat system feeds back into the role-playing game.
So that's something I need to play test to see whether it actually works or not. I'm really pleased with the system, particularly because I've had to revamp ideas about magic use in combat and stuff like that. And I almost purposefully haven't looked at anybody else's. I've sort of tried to say, well, I'm going to do this from scratch. If it looks identical to someone else's, that's an accident. You know, but I think I've got it right. And it's nothing to do with hit points anymore. It's to do with morale. So basically you get a unit that's usually made out of 10 to 15 individuals. And if they get down to scattered, then that's the end for them. And they don't reform, they just disappear from the battlefield. So it's close to that. Sort of
like they're basically routed.
But then there's magic involved. So you have the oratory at the beginning of battle. So if everybody's standing around a commander and they give a great oratory, then you get a bonus on your morale. And then you get into the battle situation. And at the beginning of each combat round, the spellcaster goes first. So they will be able to cast a spell either against the enemy or towards the allies to enhance their situation, or, you know, all that sort of stuff. So I've gone into quite a lot of detail with it. It hasn't been shown to the public yet, but it does appear in A Plague on Their Houses. There's a battle situation. That's the first time it appears. And also it's going to appear in the new game Wreck as a siege. So, yeah.
I suppose to sort of wrap up, let's talk about the Kickstarter and this is the last day of it. It finishes tomorrow, is that right?
Yes, it does. Yeah. It's almost there. It's almost there. Yeah. The Kickstarter this is a I suppose a beta. This is what it will look like as a finished book. So it's over 300 pages, and it's got everything in it, all the systems, including all the creatures. I think there's over 70 different creatures in there. There's almost 100 spells. There's loads of skills. It pretty much is filled with everything, including an adventure at the back. And so, but the one thing I hate about a lot of books, they start off with a short story. They're very glossy. The illustrations are absolutely beautiful and sumptuous. And it starts off with a short story that I don't want to read. And I go, how do I create a character? Come on, where is it? Where is it?
You want to get into the game.
And then, you just want to get into
Anomaly does that. Anomaly starts off with a scenario, sort of short story, trying to get you in the universe.
The only one that ever worked and that made total sense was Call of Cthulhu, because it started off with the short story Call of Cthulhu, so that made total sense. But all the other ones, I'm going, oh please, for God's sake, can I just have a look at the game mechanic? Can I actually get a feeling? I'll get a feeling for how the game is. At the other end of this book, I've got a complete section on the setting, including what towns and villages are like, what transport is like, all that sort of stuff. But that's at the other end of the book. At the beginning of the book, it starts off with how to create a character, how to use skills, how to use magic. It's got stuff like how to build your own farm. And I've got the pricing for all that in there. And that's based on actual research. So I've filled it with the mechanics. It's top heavy on the mechanics of playing and how to get immersed into the world of the game itself. So the Kickstarter, that is the core book. And that's the main thing. You can get it. Obviously, the low end starts off with a digital version. I haven't yet published the final version purely because if the Kickstarter works, then I'm going to have a couple of pages of the pledges in here, and if people have put in a certain amount of money, then they can create characters that I'll put in here as well. So there's that, and then there is about there's a quick start version of the game, which I've got, which has got a separate, that's in there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, and again, digital or hard copy version of it. And then I've got The Nature of the Beast, Plague on Their Houses, The Spanish Coin. All these are separate adventures, and they're waiting for the Kickstarter to finish before I launch them. Now, we've got, as I say, as you said, we've probably got about 12 hours or 14 hours left of the Kickstarter. It's not quite there yet.
Yep. Links in the description, folks, by the way. Get down there.
Please. And seriously, I can't thank enough the people that have already pledged. Some people have pledged up to £200, and they are absolutely amazing, and I can't thank them enough. I've got the support of people like Ernie Gygax that is plugging away. When I first started, the reason I went to GaryCon all those years ago is because when Gary Gygax died, I did a portrait of him in pencil, and I put it on Facebook. And then Ernie Gygax, his oldest son, messaged me and said, "Do you mind if we use this for a poster?" And as far as I was concerned, up until that point, the name Gygax were these sorts of godlike beings up there on huge pedestals that I would never have anything to do with. These are the people that changed my life. These are the people up there with Tolkien and the guy that started Star Trek. Is that Jerry Anderson?
Star Trek. No, that Jerry Anderson was Thunderbirds.
That was Thunderbirds.
Gene Roddenberry.
That's it. These people, not to an extent, Jerry Anderson, that literally Lovecraft completely rewrote culture. Yeah. So Gary Gygax, what he's done, what he did, what these people did with role plays is literally completely rewrite culture, enable, and the most amazing thing that you'd have never imagined, reinvented storytelling. For normal people, ordinary people can now gather around the fire of an evening and literally tell stories to each other.
That's the way it used to be. There's some sort of pretentiousness has gone into storytelling. And I've seen it in particular with indie writing. There's so many narcissists out there that think they're the only way, and the random gatekeeping for no reason whatsoever. And I'm always of the mind, I've always said in this channel, we need more creators, not less.
No,
everyone, even if it's not for financial or a business.
What I say to my students as part of the behavior management thing is well, most schools have this, that you'll get a consequence, i.e. you'll get a minor naughty boy thing if you talk over the teacher. And then I say, as far as I'm concerned, any student in my classroom answering a question becomes a teacher for that moment. I say exactly the same thing when I'm DMing a game. Any time somebody is talking, they become the dungeon master for that moment. They're the ones that are changing the story. They're the ones that are contributing to what happens next. And that, for me, is the nub of all these things. And End of Kings is all about that. And I get at my most excited as a game master when people go off-piste, when suddenly they decide to do something that I've never thought of in my writing. That's when it gets really exciting. Now, I think and this is where you can't actually write this into any book, the skill of a game master to be able to say, I'm going to go with this. And a bad game master will go, no, it's not written like that, so you can't do it.
That's where the railroading comes in. That's where the frustration.
Yeah.
And then you don't feel like you're part of it. You feel like you may as well just be a piece on a board getting moved along.
Absolutely. So hopefully I put enough into and this is something that I worry about, because I put an awful lot of information into all my adventures, and that's because I want the game master to say, if they do go in that direction, I know what's there, because I've put it on the map. Even if it's and I can guarantee that most people playing the adventures, even anytime I go through one of my adventures that I've written, I miss out at least a third of it, because the players have decided to go in another direction. I love that. This is the whole point. I want it to feel as if they don't have any limits on what they can do.
It's that been sort of the greatest challenge of putting this together, is the factor it in without factoring it in, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it's the biggest challenge. I mean, obviously 30 odd years of winging it is brilliant. To actually write it down so that another game master can actually run it. That's a completely new thing, and I think that's the hardest challenge I've had, is to actually step back from what I've written, pretend I haven't written it, look at it and going, does that actually make sense? Have I made it too complicated? So I mean, there's elements in this which I think you said you might be asking me, and it ties in with the Kickstarter. Once I'd spent, I'm still finishing writing this. As I said earlier on today, I was adding to the timeline because I suddenly realized that if I'm saying that magic is a fact in this environment, then there's going to be major magical events that are going to be taking part in the 17th century that aren't actually in real history.
Yeah.
And so,
you have to make it as if it is history.
So I've had to include them, and I've had to make it logical. And so far, I think I've got it right. The other thing somebody asked me the other day, and it's so annoying because I'm really interested now, and I've already got enough on my plate, for God's sake. What happened in America during this time? And I immediately went into the first thing is you're thinking, oh, the settlers. Then you go, colonial guild. and then I thought, no, let's flip this. You have in 1570 a thing called the Iroquois Confederation. I think this is 5 tribes or 6 tribes. So if I started writing what happens in America in the End of Kings, I'd start with that. I'd start off with the 5 tribes. I'd start off with the existing culture, and then I'd have the invading colonialists coming in. Now, and this is where it becomes a really touchy issue, and I don't know if role-playing games have ever dealt with this yet, but would you be able to, how could you role-play this and not feel, for want of a better phrase, a sense of colonial bias? In one direction.
Cameron's Native American, one of my co-hosts.
Yes.
And there's a big thing in the culture as well. That's why there's very limited in terms of Native American lore, because they have the belief of to say the thing is to invoke the thing.
Yes.
So that's why like the Wendigo and all isn't really mentioned. It's only been sort of gleaned. Tulpas, if you imagine it, it gets manifested into existence.
Yeah.
And that's always been a taboo.
Wow.
And I think even up until today. So
wow.
There's actually quite a bit of touchiness about.
So even being in a role-playing environment is, so it's almost
you're basically, the belief is if you say it, you're invoking it.
So it almost buys into the 1980s
satanic panic.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. I have been given the name of somebody and the contact details of somebody who's a Native American who role plays, and
you don't have to do it. That's what I was asking about. Letting writers,
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't have to be on your.
I've got so many fronts here. I've got the 30 Years' War, which I've only just brushed on. I haven't actually touched it directly yet. I've got there's 2 empires off to the east. There's the Ottoman Empire, and to the east of that, there's one called the Safavid Empire, and they themselves are at war. The Ottomans are also at war with the Habsburgs, which is the Eastern European bloc. Okay, who are also at war with the northern bit, and that's the 30 Years' War. So there's this mass of mess throughout Europe at the time. And each one of these different elements is beautiful for an independent role-playing game. All of them are there. And it's perfect because you've got this perfect clash between science, superstition. What would happen to science if magic was real? Where would it go? How would it work together? My first thought is Leonardo da Vinci's machines having what are called etheric charges filled with magical charge and actually working. So you'd have
techno pages out of Babylon 5.
We're going straight into steampunk. We're going into 17th century steampunk. We're getting whole platoons of dragoons who are winged dragoons. There's mechanical horses. I've actually got mechanical horses in this in the actual core rulebook. I've got a suit of armor that's basically Iron Man's suit of armor in here. So your imagination, there's nothing wrong with having a blimp, hot air balloons up there.
Mhm.
It's up to you what you do.
Well, that's
with it.
like the old Warhammer Fantasy dwarf armies.
Absolutely,
They
and there's nothing
really lent into that, and it was...
but it was all there. I mean, I've done the research. I think one of the earliest, I've actually put it in the timeline, one of the earliest experiments with steam power is in something like the 1630s in Italy. It didn't go very far, so it took until we had Watt in this country before it became a functional thing. But way back in the 1600s, steam power was being looked at. My mates, who's in the Sealed Knot, which is the people that reenact the 17th century stuff, he says all the technology was available for the sniper rifle back then, but they hadn't put it all together. That's all. And he's doing his best with his character. He's got an ongoing character that's gone through a lot of the adventures, and he's doing his best to have his character not metagame and devise a sniper rifle because he knows it could happen.
haven't been born yet,
so we've got, because of magic, we've got magical bullets. We've got magical, all sorts of stuff like that going on. The goblins, for God's sake, these are creatures that come out of the Shadowlands. They look a little bit like D&D goblins. They're the closest, because every game does need to have that one monster that can be killed with one hit. The real bothersome creature that you just go, right, come on, let's go through these. Goblins love human inventions, so they've created their own version of muskets that self-destruct after about 5 goes.
That just sounds like orcs and goblin armies. Yes, Warhammer.
Well, absolutely.
You don't roll. You start rolling ones and things go boom.
Yes.
Yeah, you give up. You just go, right, I'm taking that off, taking that off, taking that off.
I've actually no, but the thing is, if for me, let's go back to the thing of this. It's the mix of, this is funny, this is very, hold on a moment, this is really serious. And I want that to happen. I want that sort of like, oh, this is fun, oh my God. I want that sense of the unexpected. You
want the roller coaster, like you can't keep everybody up here all the time. You have to have that leveling out.
The great horror story is almost identical to the great comedy story. Comedy comes from the unexpected. It comes from, I didn't expect that to happen. Oh my God, that's funny. Or I didn't expect that to happen. Oh my God, I'm terrified. And they're roughly the same thing. And so my games want to do that, but they're all ready. So if you're going to go on the Kickstarter, please make a pledge. It's the book has got everything in it. It's an incredible amount of stuff that you'll be very, very familiar with. There's an awful lot of new things in there. If you want to buy the book, not just to use for End of Kings, but if you want to buy it because it's got a whole section on magic circles, which I haven't seen in any other games. There may be games out there with it, but this, I've gone into all including the salt circle used in Supernatural. Oh yes, it is used. But it's magic circles, ingredients for potions, which goes all the way back to first edition DM's guide. I've brought them back in because I used to love wading through those. It's got tons of new spells. Most of the magic books in this are based on actual books that actually exist. So there's the Munich document, which is a loose portfolio of spells which German priests had gathered together because they were blasphemous. And this is a real thing. So it's basically we've got the Necromonicon. I don't need to mention the Necromonicon because we've got the Book of Enoch, we've got the Book of Solomon, and we've got these genuine magic books that were written. And I love that. So I've pushed all those in here. Constructing everything from constructing a laboratory, constructing a farmstead, even digging a well. So if you want to play it like a virtual Sims game and have and go through an adventure, earn a lot of money, and then build a new building, start and all that sort of stuff, you could do it. I want people to feel that free. I want the big element in this, and this is again based on reality, is social status. So if you start off as a lowly commoner, as you gain reputation, you could go up the hierarchy, start being invited to the court, all that sort of stuff, and gain that sort of power, and even involve yourself in that sort of stuff. And also, because the English Civil War is going on and there's a timeline to it, as you're going on in your adventure, you've got an ongoing consciousness that underneath it all, there's an undercurrent of the king's just done that. The king's in Scotland. The king's doing this. Oh my God, they've just won have you heard the battle's been won over there? That's changed everything. Oh my God, what are we going to do? So I want that to be there, and I don't find that in many role-playing games. That sense of events outside your immediate sphere actually involving you, you know. So I've tried to put that in the game as well. If you just want it to be a sandbox with you quickly going through a game, killing a monster, and then having a drink in the pub, it's there. If you want to make it into a big epic and to have an ongoing, which is why I got rid of the idea of sanity in the game.
Because that's one thing about Cthulhu's really frustrating. Campaigns are a nightmare.
Yeah, you can't have a campaign. You can have Cthulhu is perfect for a convention. Everybody shoots each other or goes off their rocker, ripped apart by ghouls, whatever. But in this one, I actually took it out purposefully. I took it out. You still have trauma, but the trauma, you can go to a priest, you can go to a cunning folk, and they will give you a potion, or they'll say a prayer over you, and your mind will be eased. You'll have a sleepless, you'll remember what happened, but it won't affect you like it would. You know. So I've dialed that down so that players feel as if they're never going to lose control of their character, and if they do die, it's because they've been stupid, basically.
Yeah, that's fancy fair enough.
We all make stupid decisions.
Where's the eldest arrived?
Hi.
Just as we're wrapping up. Sorry, just we've been getting into things. I see a few folks there have turned up in the chat and been sort of saying hello as we're going along.
Hi.
Sorry, just go back over.
Hi, Tom. Best creator's intention, John Carpenter.
Christine,
I'm just trying to think what sort of. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Vampires.
Yes, he wrote his own music, didn't he, for his films? John Carpenter.
Halloween.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, absolutely. But of course, that goes up. We can go all the way back to the first sound film that Hitchcock made, which was a British film, and I think it was called Murder or something, or M. And it's, bearing in mind, it's the very first sound film that he ever made. And he has this moment where this woman has accidentally stabbed somebody that was attacking her and killed him. And then the next scene, she has to sit down with the family and have a meal. And it's a Sunday lunch, so they're cutting with the knives, and he does it beautifully, building up this tension. And then this woman starts wittering on. It's, hand me your knife, and the knife. And then the rest of the script blurs out, and all she starts hearing is knife. And it's it's like, oh my God. And this is almost the first sound film that he did, and immediately it works. Oh my God, he knew how to get under your skin.
What was
it? Really did.
He has done hundreds of movies. I think we worked it out. We were going to do it. It would take us about 2 years to cover all of his movies if we were even doing a stream every day.
Yeah.
Not messing, being completely rigid.
My wife won't look at the birds. She'll never see the birds. She doesn't want to. I don't know. I've seen them all.
She should watch behind the scenes, because when they show you how they train the birds, because basically if somebody stopped moving, the bird would land on them. That's how they train them for the thing. So it was only when somebody stopped moving. So periodically they'd have somebody stop so a bird would land on them.
Yeah.
And when you actually see that bit behind it, it's so serene and tame and cuddly. You know, people put this stuff on Instagram now with but change the camera angle.
I'll tell you music. The other film that I buy into, and I can't wait to turn it into a 17th century. I've actually got a setting for it already in the middle. I've created a county called Brancaster. Brancaster exists as a town in Norfolk, but it sounded like such a great name that I decided to use it for a whole county. I've placed the county in the real world, so Ripon is now in the southernmost part of Brancaster, and so Brancaster's north of there. It's basically a plot of northwest Yorkshire that doesn't have a lot in it. Forgive me, those people living there. I'm not belittling it, but it gives me an opportunity to sandbox a whole area so I can start filling it with stories. So most of my adventures are set there. Okay. So, yeah. So, I can't remember what I was talking about now, but that's basically where they're all set. And you could go from one adventure to the other. And oh yes, that's it. The heart of it, which is the city of Brancaster. I've actually started writing a supplement which will be published just focusing on the city. It involves all the politics, all the guilds, a bit sort of like a Waterdeep sort of supplement, if you like. But one of them is a witch's house right in the heart of the slum area that no one can occupy. And there's where you start looking at the house on Haunted Hill. I dare you to go in there and spend the night. Nobody ever comes out. And the original one, I think there's two of them. There's The Haunting of Hill House and The House on Haunted Hill. I think there was two films. And the one I keep thinking of is the one where it's the woman that's going off her rocker. And there's a spiral staircase in the library.
Yeah, that's The Haunting of Hill House.
Oh my God! Now for me, that's one of the great films.
Stevenson. Oh my God, I can't remember. Shelley. I can't remember the author's name in the books.
Yeah, but it's brilliant. For me, it's one of the great films. It's I don't like the remake. I quite like the TV series that they did, which was so far away from the original movie that it was fine. But the original film, that sense of terror, and it goes all the way back to this is it. It goes back to childhood terror. You've got it's like when those two women were sleeping in separate rooms and then suddenly one of them sees the wallpaper start moving and she has to run into the other room and, oh my God, I can't cope with it. That's the level of fear that I really like, where it's not actually directly attacking anybody. It's just there and constantly driving people insane slowly.
Shirley Jackson, I knew it.
Yes. Yeah. For a second. But yes. So, but it's hopefully it's faithful to the period, 17th century. It does have witch hunters in it. It has zombies in it. It has giants and dragons in it. It's got cunning folk. It's got the plague. It's got witch hunt. I said witch hunters. Yep. It's got the English Civil War. It's got everything that you can think of in the English, but it's not for people. People don't have to know about the 17th century to play it. It's just.
But you will want to. The way the story's told, that's what I found. You want to remember the history lessons. You want to go back and delve in because it's a fascinating period of history.
Thank you.
And you did a really great job. Honestly, you really piqued my interest when we had that playthrough, and I'm glad I got to take part.
Well, I'm looking forward to the next one on the 28th of September.
Oh yeah,
I can't wait. I can't wait to play that. Yeah,
I think I'm involved in that one. But Si, thanks very much for coming on. It's an absolute pleasure, and hopefully we'll do this again. And like I said, looking forward to getting involved in the games.
Yeah,
folks, get involved with the Kickstarter. Let's get this over the line, because what you're looking to do then is get this all published and then start funneling into the supplements and that, and make it a universe.
I will be trying to publish it anyway, but it'll just take a bit more time and will come out in a different way. But if we can get this Kickstarter over the line, that it means that I can get all this out there and you'll be able to get all this wonderful stuff. I'm being a bit, I did this, but it's still great. Get all this wonderful stuff out there as quickly as you can. And even if you're not going to play the games, just read the books, because I think they're fascinating. I think their period is fascinating.
I've been telling people, actually, some of the best stories out there are TTRPG books.
Yeah.
People still care about telling stories. Novels, not a lot of them are just, nobody cares.
No.
They're just pumping stuff out for the sake of it. And you can't get away with that with a role-playing game.
No, you can't.
You will not be forgiven. The nerd rage is a thing.
With me, the moment you feel as if you're in a cliche, the moment as a player you go, oh, I've been here before, is the moment to start worrying in my games, because I will never take you down that path. It'll always end up somewhere else.
Fantastic. There you go. Like I said, Si, thank you very much for coming on. Thanks for everyone in the chat. Sorry I didn't get the more of you. It's just we're quite involved here, and obviously, as you know, it's the way we go here. That's what we want to do, and that's why he's come here. But thanks again. Keep updated with the channel. Check out the link. It's in the description. And until next time, keep updated with the channel. Do the type of things. And remember to keep it creepy. Keep it horrific.